Thank you for coming. And we're all very sad about the loss of our dear friend Peter. And it was really quite a shock for me. And I can't even begin to imagine what kind of shock it was for Cindy and her family. It was August 13th. In the afternoon, they were on vacation up in North Maine. And Cindy was just getting ready to go up there. And she had an MS. Just a tragedy. Just something. Peter was 55 years old. Just could never understand how that could happen. So I'm Jonas Ruta. I was asked to curate the show. And I think we have something like at least 100 pieces here. And the very diverse work that Peter did, a very consistent artist, I have to say, even though his work is very varied. His style is very continuous. Yeah. So I'm going to give a little talk. I would like, this is Joe Provey, who's a lifelong friend of Peter's, I understand, and Cindy Anderson. Cindy Anderson, Peter's wife.
But I love Peter. I'm married to him.
She's a professional. She's a doctor of nutrition.
Naturopathic
medicine. And so thank you all for coming. I appreciate you all being here very much. And the work means a lot to me. It's been interesting for me to really get to closer to the work, having seen it all. And Peter was worked in his studio in his basement mostly, and so I know because he was out of telephone range. So whenever I wanted to call him, it was just like answering voicemail. That's all I got. But I'd like Joe to read the obit that appeared on Legacy in August, and I'll follow with some comments and some talk about his work. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, I wasn't quite a lifelong friend. I met Peter about 17 years ago. I wish I had known him before, but from this obit, we get a few facts. Peter was a prolific, most of his art is not even here, and passionate visual artist who received his bachelor's degree from Minneapolis College of Art and Design. He brought a unique perspective to his paintings, integrating several visual styles from pop art to abstract expressionism. Employing metaphysical themes, he received multiple accolades during his career. Peter was also a committed educator. He brought innovation and inspiration to teaching as a professor of art history at the University of Bridgeport. As director of the university's Schelfhaudt gallery, he produced exemplary exhibitions. Many of us have been here multiple times. It seemed every month there was another one, and they were terrific. For the art school and for the broader community. Playful provocateur, he generously shared his teaching talents at the Westport Senior Center. Possessed by a quick-fire sense of humor, for sure, always ready to lend a helping hand and continually nurturing his enduring friendships. Peter was gifted with a boundless empathy and compassion. Besides an encyclopedic knowledge of the visual arts and lives of the artists, he was also a connoisseur of popular culture, especially music and film. A respected figure at Bridgeport, he was affectionately known as the Art Dude. For all who knew him, he will live in the Museum of Our Hearts forever. I would just add that Peter had a trait that I think is like extremely important to me. His perseverance to create art. He was intimidating the amount of art, for another artist, he was absolutely intimidating. Because you'd produce your one piece every 3 weeks or so, and he would produce, 20 or 30. So anyway, I miss him. I miss him as a tennis partner, as a chess partner, and enough can't be said about that. So his memorial will be held on November 10th, 2 p.m. And let's see, the opening of his retrospective will follow from 2 to 5 p.m. Funds will be raised towards an endowment in his name to support this gallery, and donations may be made to the university and there's a website, a link here. So I think this is available to everybody.
Thank you, Joe. Would you like to make some comments now, or later?
No, when we.
All right, I have a few quotes to read that were from items that appeared. This is from CT Art List. This is what WAC Solos exhibition. Peter Konsterlie's work also incorporates documentation and paintings that resemble the studies of a scientist exploring the layers and compartments of the human body. In Konsterlie's work, the artist's process is intentionally transparent, which he mirrors in his compositions through visible transparent washes of the paint and dissected layers in his presentation of the cosmos. And that was written by Amy Mackey, assistant curator of the New Museum, Art 21. One other quote, let's see, by Leslie Saffer, from the executive director of Art Space, the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, on the Radius exhibition. I'm sorry, that was different. Okay, this is from Richard Klein, sorry. The Radius exhibition at the Aldrich. Konsterlie employs medical diagrams of the human body, taking already abstracted anatomical information and reinterpreting it in an intuitive and expressionistic manner. The artist utilizes a variety of techniques, including spray painting through stencils and accidents involving controlled drips and fluids, staining of the canvas. Konsterlie transforms what might be merely grotesque into the strangely beautiful in compositions that speak of the fragility of the human body. That's from Richard Klein at the Aldrich. And one more quick one. And I have something to read also. I'll pass the mic. This is from Leslie Schaefer at the Corcoran Museum. Sorry. I was immediately drawn to the dynamic composition of Peter Konsterlie's work. The paint and color create an interaction and depth most likely achieved through great effort and skill. Konsterlie's style demonstrates an interest in historical abstract painting and experimentation. And that's Leslie Schaefer at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington. So I'll pass the mic over to Cindy.
You want me to do opening?
As you wish.
No, I'll do this later.
I have paper too.
I just wanted to thank everybody who's here. A lot of you knew Peter and were friends with him, or you worked with him, or maybe you were students of his. He loved teaching. That was another thing that he did besides art. No matter, it seemed, what he was doing, it involved art. And so he was always reading about art, educating about art, or doing art. So that was a lot of his life, as you can see. I want to thank a few people just right now who are here, and I don't know if Mary Jo McGonigal is the the director of the museum now, or the art gallery, and I couldn't think of anybody better to step in his place afterwards, and she's been so helpful with getting together, helping us start up the show. And then Jonas, the curator, helping. This was an amazing amount of work to put this all together and decide what to keep and what not to keep. In fact, there's a painting here, and when Jonas was at the house, I said, should we keep this painting? You have to decide, do we keep or not keep? Keep or don't keep? And for the show, and he said, okay, don't keep. And then we both looked to the left-hand corner, and it's in the show because right in the top left it said keep. Because he would write on his paintings. So when you go around, you will find a lot of humorous written comments in his paintings. So Jonas and I both said, Jonas goes, it says keep. And I said, it says keep. And on the back it says the keeper. So you can find that painting somewhere in the gallery. So I also want to thank Lee, who's been really indispensable. And Lee, can you stand up a minute? Who's been here like every step of the way. Anyways, and Joe came on a moment's notice and helped hang this up. And so, yeah. So, okay, that's my opening comments.
Okay. And I wanted to thank the faculty also. It was fantastic help. We really did great work all together. The three of us, and Joe, and the students that we had here, Shreya and Casey, were just absolutely fantastic. They really showed their training and their helpfulness and wonderful natures and everything. So that was great. And also Richard Yale and Mary Jo McGonigal. Thank you so much for this opportunity to work with you all. I really appreciate it. So it's great to have everyone here. A lot of Peter's family is here from Portland, Oregon, and from Minneapolis. No.
We have people from Alaska.
Alaska.
All the way from Alaska.
Alaska. Cindy's sister and Michael, Chris. So it's great to everybody to be here. I have a little piece. Cindy had asked me to stand up and talk a little bit. So late last night, everything sort of clicked together, and all of Peter's work suddenly just kind of created itself in my mind's eye. It was just really quite something. All of a sudden, I really started seeing it all back. And after doing the work, putting it all up, it was a whole different presence. So. I wanted to read something what I wrote last night. Peter is a deeply educated art historian with a profound understanding and sense of art and artistic expression. But Peter is an original. His vision comes out of his personal psyche. His imagery is joy-filled for all to see in the many exhibits he's done. And I've done a few with him too. His imagery is carried out from his deep subconscious. Colors are vivid. Lines, forms, and objects are explosive, elongated, and implosive. Peter had the great capacity to think for himself, as we've all discussed this power that he possessed in our talks at Cindy's with Joe and his wife. And Peter's consciousness and wit with people created recognition for his ideas and understanding to make him successful. And he was able to bring forth visions that are related to his own personal identity and to universal phenomena. Joe Provey, in our discussion, said, out of all the artists that he knows, Peter is the most informed about art history. Peter's basic approach as a teacher was his vast knowledge and his own creative talent and what he learned in the constant prolific production of his artwork. And I have to stress that. I think he's learning as he's working, is materializing. He was a perpetual and dedicated painter who would cloister himself in the basement workroom, in his basement workroom studio, where he was out of range of the telephone and interruptions. Very hard for me to get in touch with him, actually. He had rock music, blues, and folk rock were his creative backdrop and the company of his self-imposed and productive isolation. Great things emerged from there, but some things remained down there to become his private dimension. He and I managed to get together often and became great friends. We visited museums and galleries together in Connecticut and sometimes in New York City. And one time with his father and his brother Michael, came to the Yale Art Gallery in New Haven, and we had a great view of things, followed by like hours-long four-way discussion with his father, Paul. Peter was the youngest of four siblings. His father, Paul, was an historian and a graphics designer whom I had the fortune to get to know. As a child, Peter was probably the benefactor of upbringing, being the youngest, so probably the most relaxed in terms of child rearing. But Paul was credited as being rather much more rationalistic in his approach as a graphics designer. So I think Peter came across it from a different. He had that in his DNA, but also expanded from there into his own personal vision. So the graphics design in Peter, that understanding from his father, I think he expanded and surpassed in his own open exploration of the irrational world of pure abstraction and also of representational abstraction. And you can see really in his work what I'm talking about. Really take time to really kind of stare at each painting for a little bit to get an idea of what was in his mind in terms of the time and stillness and the time that he took working on his artwork, on each painting. And he was so prolific. So there was this kind of a gap, I think, in his childhood between the designing mind and the purely creative mind that he possessed. But Peter had the intuitive talent to really see and express from his psyche, from his hallucinatory view, and the stark views of his anatomical medical studies, and further from his knowledge in his own relationship to objects, forms, lines, and delineations. So if you see what he's working on in terms of ovals, in terms of forms, in terms of background, and the dots and the bubbles in his work. Patterns and sensations emerge, recessive spaces in some pieces, like that one in the corner, which seems to go off into infinity if you look at it from across the room. It's very powerful to really study. Total foreground presences in many others of his paintings, like the recurrence of the bubble motif in his work. Bright colors are present as discrete illuminations. And I mean by that individual points in time and space of color. Spectral bands of energy. Peter had psychic realizations, and his dimension and his understanding of dimension and real space he conveyed to his panels and his canvases. Spatial relationships are formed, and his brushstrokes become alive and seem to experience joy on their own. In Peter's work, there's a pure rationality and a consciousness in this dream phenomenon. There is light and energy, but no malevolent entities are visible or obfuscated. There are none present or hidden, even when the subject comes out in a negative form, like the face in the far corner, if you look at that. The sensation seems to me a rational malevolence rather than a mysterious evil. This is because Peter himself is a positive energy force, and I insist on speaking of him in the present tense. I do. He's there. And his, like the 11-foot painting of the cosmic man that we installed there was quite phenomenal. Quite a project to put it up.
Yeah.
So I think, there's something there when he was on Earth that I believe his essence is in both places at once. He's in karmic reality as he was here in the world with us. So he's a conscious entity still.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the comic reality phase.
I'm sorry?
That's the comic reality phase.
Comic reality phase. Good. I'll have to ask you about that. Hold that thought. Peter is timelessly a good angel who conveys his views of infinite realms, and he's left all this work to us. His visions of internal psychic dimensions. These are carefully constructed but deeply interior patterns. That is what the theosophists called the hypostases, which are the underlying constructed pillars of the created universe. His painting, the God particle, which is the last one on the left here in this room, and his geometric galactic patterns of oval lines like these. You see several of them under here. There's an oceanic feeling in his work of the flying fish. That's the other one. So Peter's upper level of psychological consciousness, this was Peter's upper level of psychological consciousness itself. And it was his consciousness in art is what he taught to his students. I really believe that he was on to. This was his way of teaching his students to appreciate, to understand and to appreciate the whole world and the universe. I think this is a beautiful training. So this is something also his servicemen. But even with these intensities coming out of his psyche, Peter created these visionary paintings. It's a profound sense of pathos in his servicemen series, and these commemorate in watercolors the face of 240. Is that right? 240 armed servicemen that were killed in 1 week in the Vietnam War in 1968. And I think what happened, if I'm not mistaken, was that Peter saw as a young boy, he was born in '63, so he was a young boy, he saw the cover of the Life magazine, and that's what...
He saw it 3 weeks before he started painting it.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, this is an inspiration, you can see, of his humanity. Peter liked artists such as Paul Klee, Robert Rauschenberg, Clay Oldenburg, and Andy Warhol. But given his early education in art history and the panorama of his works, there's centuries of design. I can see that his perpetual education came through his personal work, his free exploration of everything he could get onto his canvases, like the curvature of space-time. This was his personal continuum, his continuing experiential learning curve.
All right, I'm just going to give a few telling anecdotes, some of my earliest memories of Peter, because I think they help understand his work. I think his work is not easy to understand. And I don't want to veer too far away from what Peter's words actually say about his art. So the first time I met Peter, the first time I remember, I was in a gallery in Westport. It was on a river. And some of the paintings that you'll see, including this one, the old mill, the large ship as you came in, you know, there were several large paintings, and I had just met Peter, and I was like, Peter, how did you choose these subjects? And he kind of floored me because he said, well, to be honest, I took them from, I don't know whether he said a coloring book or a paint by number and enlarged them. And he said the content really, at least at this point in his career, didn't really, was secondary to the process of painting. So these are very, you know, they're very large paintings. I was blown away by them. I find a subject that, you know, affects me emotionally in some level, seascape, and I try to express it. But Peter had a whole different approach. He, you know, really looked to transform these relatively simple images and do so with, you know, I've heard Cindy talk about what it was like when he was working in the basement. He was happy, she was happy, everybody was happy. I call Peter like a wet paint painter. Like the joy of painting is while the paint is still wet. So anyway, that was my first run-in with Peter. And kind of another interesting little story came up. Peter, as everybody knows, searched around for these objects that he would create art with. He was looking for things that were perforated or an unusual shape or an angel shape, and he would go to Goodwill. My mother was a hoarder, is a hoarder, or she can't hoard right now because she's in a nursing home. But Peter and my mother met one another in the Goodwill and somehow figured out they had me in common. So anyway, this story has to do with my mother. If you would move forward. One more, two more, and we'll come back to these. This is a photo. I was at the Jewish senior citizen home visiting my mom, and we were going through old photo albums, and this photo popped out. And meanwhile, I've been thinking, how am I going to say anything intelligent about Peter's work? And I'm looking at this photo, and it finally dawns on me that Peter's work is often like a multiple exposure. This photo, as I looked at it, is actually looking through a window. This is similar to the way Peter's artwork works. Looking through a window, seeing some of what's behind the window and some of what's reflected in the window. So we can move on from this one, Robin. Thank you. So at the same time, I was reading one of the things from Peter that really told me a lot about what he was doing. He said, part of my methodology is to, while he's painting, is to stop at a certain point and change direction. So he said, to shift away from something once it begins to reveal itself. And he goes on to say, I found objects at Goodwill as tools to create images. But I think this is really a key thing. There are a lot of paintings, especially in this I series, where you could almost see him. He's painting, he sees a pattern start to emerge.